Hello, everyone. Very warm welcome and good morning here in Central Europe, and good afternoon to all of those who are joining us from Japan. My name is Péter Wintermantel, and I will be your moderator today from Budapest during this online panel discussion organized by the Hungarian Institute for Foreign Affairs and Trade under the title Economic Cooperation and Investment between the Visegrad countries and Japan. Our guests who have registered themselves previously are joining us now in a Zoom call, while simultaneously this program is also streamed as a Facebook Live event and can be followed at the Institute's website. And it is exactly where the recording of this panel discussion will be available afterwards as well. Today is Friday, February 26, 2021, a sunny morning in Budapest, but please don't worry. I'm not going to read you the news or the weather info. The reason I'm telling you this is very simple. Last Monday, February 15th, was the 30th anniversary of the establishment of the Visegrad Group. Exactly 30 years ago, on February 15, 1991, the leaders of Poland, Lech Walesa, Czechoslovakia, Václav Havel, and Hungary, József Antal, met in Visegrad in this beautiful small town of the Hungarian Danube Band with the objective of forming a new regional alliance and joining the EU and NATO together. In the past decades, the Visegrad Four became a tight bloc within the European Union, recently particularly vocal in the area of migration policy. Last week, there was a summit in Krakow where the prime ministers of the four Visegrad countries were also joined by Charles Michel, President of the European Council, to celebrate this anniversary of the Central European leaders. There are different V4 Plus cooperation formats where leaders and experts of the four Central European countries are trying to reach out and deepen their ties with other countries like Germany, the US, Japan, China, or Russia, but also with other regional groupings like the group of the Benelux countries or the ASEAN. The V4 Plus Japan cooperation is one of the richest among these cooperation schemes. It is much more than just a series of regular meetings of the state leaders, the prime ministers or foreign ministers who share fundamental values. The high-level diplomatic agenda of these summits are rather systematically followed up with practical collaboration programs in various fields like science and technology, assistance to third countries, disaster risk reduction, or the environment. On a personal note, myself being a researcher of the history of diplomatic relations between Hungary and Japan, I'd like to emphasize that this cooperation between our Central European countries and Japan in the modern times has exactly the same 30 years time span. If we think of the different kind of transitional support that Japan was provided to Poland and Hungary at the end of the Cold War in the form of technical assistance, loans and grants, or even management training programs for businessmen. A memorable event of this cooperation was then Prime Minister Kaoru Toshike's visit to our countries in 1990. But let's back to our present days. I think that in today's program, we will focus not to the past, but to the present and the post-COVID future of the economic relations of the Visegrad countries and Japan. In our online discussion today, four distinguished experts will join me from Japan and Hungary, and they are Professor Kaoru Natsuda from the Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University, Assistant Professor Atsuko Higashino from University of Tsukuba, Agnes Sunomar, Senior Research Fellow of the Institute of World Economics, and Ambassador Zoltán Sűdy, Chairman of the Shudi & Co. Ltd. First, I will ask our panelists to share their thoughts with us, and then we will move to the Q&A session, for which you can start already sending your questions in the chat of this Zoom call. Well, that's all from me now, and please let me invite now Professor Natsuda to share his thoughts with us. Professor Kaoru Natsuda is a professor at the College of International Management, Ritsumeikan Asia Pacific University of Japan, but he is also a former visiting professor at the Budapest Business School. And he was previously visiting scholar at the Charles University in Prague. He's a researcher of international development studies and international practical and economy, political economy, and international management studies. Please, Professor Natsuda, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Peter. And nice to meet you all of you today. So I'll be honored to talk about Japan-Hungarian relations. I stayed in Budapest until last summer, so I wish I could return soon, actually. Then today I will talk about Masaru Suzuki. Masaru Suzuki, the reason why is one of the most important investment, a Japanese company in Hungary. So then also I conducted research with my colleague. Then firstly, like I will show you like overview of Japanese farms in V4 country. This is a number of farms actually. Hungary case is 162. I did quite a comprehensive study in Czechia before, but in case of Czechia, Japanese companies, Japan is the second biggest investor in the country. But statistically, it's quite difficult. The reason why the Japanese investment come from Japanese European headquarters in UK, Holland. So if we look at the statistic, it's low. But if we count as a companies, it's actually quite large. Then last like 3-4 years investment from Japan is a Hungary case is a reinvestment in 2019, several like automotive related farms actually. And also this region is a automotive industry is the most attractive industry. So then what's like I did like a research when I was in Hungary with my colleague, and we look at like a supply chain network, automotive like a network, production network in Hungary, how like Major Suzuki developed since their establishment, how they control basically. What's a challenge also to the Hungarian like automotive industry in general. Then this is the findings. Major Suzuki basically contribute to process like a manufacturing technologies, also like a product development in Hungary, but it's one issue for like a Hungarian industry or also Japanese companies, a functional upgrading, which we call the R&D related like technologies. We call acquiring a new role in supply chain network. This is like upgrading is an issue for local industries. But Major Suzuki's like a commitment in local industry is much more significant than others, I would say, counterparts in the region. Then I work with my two colleagues, Dr. Sas and Ksonka in the Budapest Business School, and we visited Major Suzuki and Japanese and also Hungarian local suppliers. Then what like an important issue in Japan in automotive industry, this is not only Hungary in general, is actually Japanese supply chain network change with the global system. Then and particularly like Japanese created 3-tier system, tier 1, which is a very big farm, tier 2, 3, this kind of 3-layer system. Then this 3-layer system is and the tier 1 farm, they start controlling certain capacity, actually design. Car company design all components, actually components company, big company control it. So this like a significant change occurred. Then those like a tier 1 big farms, Bosch from Germany, Denso in Japan, that's operating in Hungary too. So they created, we call the modular system actually in many countries. So it's a way of business has changed last 20, 30 years actually. Then what's relation with local farms? Because multinational corporation came to the country, then they local companies, they shifted 5 ways, actually following ways. Sometimes stay in a local, sometimes downgrade. Some farm try to find a niche position in a globally, like this kind of shift occurs. Then this is like assembler, this kind of supplier relation. There is 2 views. First view, optimistic view is a local company can upgrade through supply chain. Then negative view is this process is not simple because the latest technology cannot be transferred. They don't want to be like a company. So that's kind of argument exists. Then we will look at the Hungarian overviews. It's I think Hungarian people know so I will skip these parts. Then Major Suzuki is second actually investor in the country. Opel is first, I think. Then Major Suzuki and Audi came in 93, Mercedes 2008. But currently only 3 companies are producing car. Then in case of Hungary, one of the significant aspects is Hungary is the engine producing country. especially Audi. Audi is the biggest engine factory located in Gyo. So then in Hungary, 700 suppliers operating in the country, also 175,000 employees are created. So that's like overview of assemblers. Then this is a production and the sales volume. So Major Suzuki Opel started. Once like a industry reached 500,000, but now it's slightly declining. Actually. Then Major Suzuki was one of most important FDI in the country. Then their strategy, initial strategy in Hungary was to supply actually domestic market. But they had to shift their policy. The reason why was domestic market demand was weak. Also, cost became very high. They import components from Japan. So in the 90s, they changed. They tried to create export platform in Hungary to Western European countries. However, like in order to use duty-free access to Western European market, local content rule existed. Still is. Then the Major Suzuki had to achieve 60% of EU contents, then 50% of Hungarian contents. That was a significant issues for Major Suzuki. They have to achieve they have to source components locally. But the European OEM, they are located in Europe, so they didn't have such a requirement. So they import basically from neighboring country simply. So it's a different start actually of industry and business base. Then, sorry, then production trend. Major Suzuki, their production increased until 2008 before Lehman shock came. Then at that time, they produced small vehicles actually in Hungary. But what happened is Lehman shock, so their production dropped after this period. So that's you can see. Now it's 170,000, a bit more, something like that. Then how they change their strategy after this Lehman shock is they change their product actually. Hungary is currently their production of sports utility vehicles, which are Vitra and the SX4S Cross. Suzuki is generally speaking small car company, small specializing small car. Those models are most expensive for them. So Hungary is their production platform of those expensive models, then export to all over the world. In Japan, Vitra in Japan are imported from Hungary anyway. So those two models. So Hungary is playing the role of export platform of their expensive products. So that's a current Suzuki's strategy. Then we will I will explain then supply chain networks issues. Then there are 3 types of farm. Then Suzuki initial stage they targeted level 3 farms. They don't have any know-how of business. Typically tier 2, 3 farms. They try to upgrade such a low technology farms in Hungary. Then they provide a series of trainings to develop their capability. Then there are 2 types of product contract. One is general parts, which are actually Hungarian suppliers produce mostly general parts. Then those general parts on the production arrangement, it's called drawing supplied method, which is a Suzuki provide all blueprint. Then company produce according to blueprint. This type of product contract actually. Okay. Then functional parts case is a multinational corporations. Then those functional parts are based on drawing approval method, which is actually designed by multinational firms, company. Then Suzuki gave approval. So this kind of more added value activities actually in such a product contract. So Suzuki is using those 2 types of product contract. The initial stage, therefore, as mentioned, they local contents exist. So upgrading local farms is important for them. Also, another important issue is inviting, particularly Japanese supplier into Hungary. That's the first phase. But the local firm, they don't have a technology, so they provide all even tools from Japan. So then development of this, sorry, I could not see, general parts is firstly, like they have 3 stages how to develop. This is until now, actually, they are using same way currently too. So process upgrading, they do first production technology upgrading, change production lines, layout, simple way. Then product development, designing product by customers. Then Suzuki help them actually to do it. Then sometimes they train in Japan, so then supplier develop their products. Then second strategy is the Japanese multinational. So after Suzuki, Japanese supplier came to Hungary. Currently, about 50 Japanese company automotive was operating in Hungary. Then second stage of Suzuki's supply chain network is 2000s actually. At that time, they had a plan to reach 300,000 vehicles production a year. So Japanese companies start floating actually, came to Hungary. Then at that time, 300 suppliers operating actually in total, local Japanese and also another multinationals. But what's happened was Lehman shock, 2008 to 9. So Major Suzuki restructured their supply chain network after that. Then local like Hungarian firms, most competitive firms stayed in the supply chain network. Less competitive one replaced by others, also downgraded into second tier suppliers. But after this period, like Major Suzuki is trying to maintain those local suppliers in their network basically until now. So currently, actually, 2,039 tier 1 firm are operating, then 27 pure local firms, which are 11% by number. Then 72 suppliers are operating in Hungary. So those figures, if we look at like a German OEM in Hungary, technically zero, basically, virtually zero in the tier 1 firms. In case of Czech, Skoda, only 3 firms, and also Toyota case is only 1, actually. So quite limited in local like firms positions in like this kind of supply chain network. So you can see these figures. Then also important issue is R&D. R&D is a Major Suzuki, they do production, process and production technology only under Hungarian government scheme, quite limited. Then time is very limited, so sorry, I have to do quickly. Then I will try to finish with, sorry, yeah, 3 minutes. Then, we visited actually 4 farms in the local farms, 2 Japanese multinationals, 2 local ones. Then A is a Japanese multinational farms. It's very big farms. They are like 87 suppliers, but 14 suppliers are local. Then export orientation is 90%. Then they develop their product by them own. So Major Suzuki gave approval basically. Then Farm B is a small Japanese one. So then Farm C, this is an important Hungarian local company. They're very unique case. They use like their own design and also approval system together, depends on their products actually. Then Farm D is a typical like farms which developed by Major Suzuki actually. Then time is limited, so just I will skip those farms. Then Farm C case is quite interesting. Farm C is like their components production, they are based on like drawing supplied method, simple way. But like they produce lots of components, but some like sheet they produce. But when Japanese company came, their operation became like a second tier. So they provide the German, Japanese seat company now. But their axle production is very competitive internationally, 86% of export. Then their method is based on both drawing supplied method, approval method. So in fact, they have an engineer to develop their products. Then, but it's a big problem is in terms of profitability, is a simple like a production method is more profitable for them. So they cannot upgrade in this way. They are slowing to upgrading their products, but not really profitable. That was a quite big major issues. Then farm decays is a typical like Hungarian local farms. Then they produce press parts. Then most important aspect is that they are like a product, like a sample product. They send it to Suzuki. Suzuki gave approval. Then what they will do is Suzuki will buy their mold, their factory, their mold in their factory are owned by Suzuki. So they created added value activities through like that die arrangement of products, for example. So not a simple supplier, they coordinate in this way. So then issue in the Hungarian economy or industry is one big issue is local sourcing is a big issue. As like a figures, like a tier 2 suppliers are very small actually in Hungary. Even local farms don't source. That was a big problem. Then another issue is a horizontal like a linkage of industry is very limited in Hungary. Also, small domestic market is too small. So that was like quite difficult for local like farms to do business actually. That was a significant issue. Then low level of R&D is a big issue. So Japanese company, they do only process product. Then local farms are engaging, but it's not really still profitable in this way. So that was like what we look particularly challenge for local industry is this like a small scale R&D operations. So thank you then for your attention. Time is limited. Sorry for that. Maybe a couple of minutes. I over, I think. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Natsuda. I don't know if you heard about that. Already in the 1960s, there were plans to establish a Japanese car assembly plant in Hungary. That time, Nissan was conducting negotiations. And that was even a while before they established their first European plant in the United Kingdom. So yes, then that plant could have been the first European car plant in whole Europe, but it didn't happen. Okay, next I'd like to ask Assistant Professor Higashino Atsuko to continue with his part. She's a senior lecturer and associate professor of the Graduate School of Business Sciences of the University of Tsukuba. She's a researcher of international relations who published several papers on European foreign and security policy issues and also EU-Japan relations. Higashino-san, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. And thank you very much for having me for this wonderful occasion. And today, my main topic is talk about how the V4 and Central and Eastern Europe's relationship with China would affect V4 Japan relationship. And I'd like to do this from international relations perspective. I am aware that all the other speakers today, including Professor Natsuda, who has already spoken to the audience, that all of them today are speaking from economist viewpoint, but please allow me to speak from a slightly different angle, namely from political science and international relations viewpoint. And I'd like to start my talk by sharing how an interest towards Central and Eastern European countries developed in Japan in recent years. And then I would like to provide an overview concerning how the EU-China relationship and V4 China relationship is seen in Japan, and how the Europe-China relationship could affect or is seen to affect Europe-Japan relationship. I then would like to take up two cases concerning how Japan sees relationship between EU, V4, or Central and Eastern European countries relation to China. The first case is the EU-China Comprehensive Investment Agreement, KAI, that came to basic agreements at the very end of last year. And the second case is 70+1 summit that took place 9th of February, and how these two cases attracted interest here in Japan. Okay, and I just wanted to share the observation that while there has been a very strong reaction from the side of Japan vis-a-vis KAI, there has been a very little reaction to 70+1 reporting, and so this already consists a very important and interesting contrast between the two important events which took place between China and European countries. Okay, I just wanted to show the Central and Eastern European countries are attracting bigger and wider interest in Japan, and writings from the writers from Central and Eastern European countries are kind of immediately translated in Japan and sold widely from the bigger publishers. This is the picture from the Amazon, which shows both the writing from Ian Krastev. Of course, Krastev is from Bulgaria and not from the V4 countries, but it shows the interest that they are what really Central and Eastern European countries people say matters in Japan as well. Another example is that they are written a history book written by Anne Applebaum. It's Iron Curtain, and this is what we used. I myself used for the seminars last year, this academic year, in order to show that how the Central and Eastern European countries' history developed. And this is a very encouraging state that the center of this Anne Applebaum's book is really Hungary, and how the Hungary has overcome this difficult history is really shared in Japanese wider audiences as well. And also the SNS strategy by V4 countries are very successful. I'm happy that I can share the tweets and by His Excellency But to my students as well, in order to get more daily basis information from V4 countries coming from. And also, just for your information, I'm sharing the tweet from the Polish embassy in Japan. And the difference is that while Hungary embassy is in terms of Hungary embassy, His Excellency himself is tweeting, and in terms of Polish embassy, the embassy itself is making a tweet. So in any case, it is really successful SNS strategy to talk to Japanese audience directly, so to speak. So this is something that didn't really happen like 10 years ago, but really seeing from the recent years, and which is very, very encouraging. So this really helps the Japanese audiences to develop the direct interest towards them as Central and Eastern European countries as well. So, but at the same time, the focus at the moment is that how the V4 countries or Central and Eastern European countries are developing their relationship with China, and it is really considered that it has a direct implication and indirect implication to Japan V4, Japan CEEC relations as well. Very widely read media. It's a diplomat to the IR people like me, or economic people like many other people. Is that there's a huge debate going on whether China has gained the heart and soul of Central and Eastern European countries, or it did not. So the debate is really going on, and it has attracted huge interest indeed in Japan as well. So how EU-China relationship has been reported and covered in Japan, Mr. Borrell's argument saying that China has been playing on difference between European countries, this word or this sentence has been widely translated in Japan and cited quite a few times, and it is it's in itself it indicates that this Europe-China relationship has got a very far-reaching implication to EU-Japan and before Japan relationship as well. And at the same time, the main coverage in Japanese media is that how Germany or Merkel is dealing with China. And recently, for the past 1, 2, 3 years, it has been, the focus is that Merkel has been very, very, very pro-China. And it has been, I have to say that a very simplistic sort of reporting in Japan. I have to say that Merkel is leading too much towards China, and Merkel is not really caring about other East Asian countries like Japan, like South Korea, etc. So I think it is too simplistic or one-sided sort of reporting from the side of Japan. But the main concern is that to what extent Germany and China is getting together, and to what extent Merkel is, so to speak, prioritizing China over other East Asian countries as well. And also, this is something that I would like to talk to afterward, but the principal agreement and the comprehensive agreement on investment with the EU and China, which came to Japanese eyes very suddenly at the end of 2020, attracted really interest, mainly from the negative viewpoint. So I would like to come back to this issue later on. So how, when it comes to the before or CEE China relationship and its implication to Japan, again, how we receive the information is very mixed. And the biggest argument is that, is it still adequate for Japan to see before as a monolithic group, or do we really have to see before as a very separate countries, which has got a very different tendencies in terms of geopolitics, in terms of diplomacy towards Asia. So I think that can be one of the focal points for us to consider how Japan should approach the before countries economically or politically, diplomatically, etc. And the rest of my talk considers that the Hungary, how Hungary and before countries behave between the confrontation between the US and China is again a big issue for Japanese reporting or Japanese media coverage. And also it's emphasized the very different positions even amongst before countries towards the banning of foray among the before countries. So Hungary is still not really decided concerning the foray issue, but Poland is, it seems obvious that it is drifting apart from foray, taking side of the US. So again, the monolithic nature of the before is kind of doubted in Japan from this perspective as well. And also, last year in 2020, the Chinese mass diplomacy really covered the Japanese newspapers, and this time vaccine diplomacy from Chinese administration is coming to the center of the reporting. And it, of course, it's got a different effect and result throughout the before countries as well. We all know that Hungary is already using Chinese vaccine, but other countries are not necessarily doing the same. So how does vaccine diplomacy would actually affect the before Chinese relationship, and how it has got the indirect sort of relationship with Japan is attracting again a huge interest as well. And I'm touching upon at the 17+1 summit, which happened like 2 to 3 years ago, 3 weeks ago. And it has been reported not as widely as Sky, but it indeed had a reporting that they are, which shows that Hungary is still at the center of the 17+1 framework, and how Hungary would behave in this framework still attracts a huge interest from the side of Japan. And also, what is really debated in Japan from the viewpoint of EU, before China relationship is that how would the before countries take the position towards Taiwan, because last year in September, the coverage concerning the head of the parliament of Czech Republic of visit to Taiwan has got a huge coverage, because afterwards China was obviously not really happy about it, and what we call wolf warrior diplomacy was really taking place vis-a-vis Czech Republic. So we really looked at closely at this issue and see how the V4 approach to Taiwan would also really has got a very direct implication concerning how we should approach to Japan, Taiwan and China in a very different perspective. And let me come back to the reporting by Kai. In the coverage of Kai, before or Hungary, it's not really spotted in this kind of reporting. So it is covered from the perspective of wider context of EU-China relationship. And this is the headline from the Asahi Shimbun, saying that Japan EU prioritized economy to human rights, and this. I think this is the problematic aspect of the Japanese reporting as well, because I think that it is utterly unfair that to say that EU is prioritizing economy over human rights, because to my eyes, I really have to say that Japan has exactly prioritized economy to human rights much more than you Europeans do. And when RCEP was argued and reached agreements last year between Japan, China, and other Asian countries, no one really problematized this from the human rights viewpoint. So while we don't really talk about human rights issue at the time of the RCEP, we do talk about the human rights issue at the Kai issues. So I think the overall argument, which is taking inside Japan, it's not really balanced. And I think it is hugely problematic to expect Europe to act accordingly in terms of the human rights issues. So I think this shows that how Japan expects what to European countries, that something that we can really do. This is the reporting from the TV Asahi, Teleasa. It says that it's a diplomatic victory to China. So this sort of win or lose or zero-sum sort of agreement, sort of argument, is often has been observed in the coverage of Japanese media. And also, again, I'm coming back to the Nikkei, and it says that it has got a destructive influence for EU-US relationship at the dawn of Biden administration. So this is another typical example of the reaction from the side of Japan, fearing that Kai has got a negative implication to EU-US relationship, and thus it has got a negative implication to Japan-Europe implication as well, because of the alliance relationship between US and Japan. And but may I repeat that, just as I said at the time of the I introduced the Kai arguments, when we talked about this RCP, we didn't really talk RCEP. We didn't really talk about the human rights issues. So we have got this sort of a little bit biased and unfair sort of argument vis-a-vis our relationship with China and your relationship with China. Okay, so since my time is limited, I'm going back to the issue of 17+1. And compared to the media coverage of KAI, 70+1 coverage was evidently smaller. But they, again, what I can say is that Hungary came to the very center of the reporting of the 70+1, showing that Japan still considered that it is the framework somewhat between Hungary and China. And also, I would like to emphasize that both in terms of Asahi and also Gigi, the vaccine in diplomacy has been the center of the this reporting concerning 70+1 summit. And also, as you can see in the previous slide, you can see Prime Minister Orban there, so which signifies that the centerness of the Hungary in this framework in Japanese media understandings. And also, but some of the media consider that the lack of or declining interest from the side of 17 countries vis-a-vis China, emphasizing that there are 6, it says 5 according to this article, but it is actually 6 prime ministers or president who were absent from the 70+1 summit. So it emphasized the declining or decrease of interest from the side of 17 countries from the participant from the European countries. So sometimes we tend to suggest that the 70+1 is getting to be outdated or old-fashioned sort of framework, but still we do care much about this, and we do still see that Hungary is a center of this endeavor. So let me jump into my conclusion. Sorry to exceed my time. In my presentation, I showed that there's an expanding interest vis-a-vis 4 countries in Japan, be it culture, be it history, be it economy, or public diplomacy and the use of SNSS. And also, it's gradually came to the agreement that the EU-China or before China relationship has got a far-reaching implication in Japan as well. And we have got 1 month or almost 2 months after the KAI agreement, and we have got like 3 weeks after 70+1 summit, and we have still got a very mixed evaluation or assessment for what has been taking place for the 2 framework from the side of Japan, at least from political perspective. So we don't still know how we can interpret or how we can apply this experience to Japan before Japan-Europe relationship as well. So and just as I mentioned, in terms of KAI, Japan has got a very distinctive expectation for the side of Europe to say to China something about human rights, something about forced labor, etc., which we can't actually do. We don't actually do. So this is a kind of one-sided expectation, which is shown in the media coverage of KAI. And in terms of 17+1, again, I didn't really touch upon this issue in my presentation, but the point I think is that there has been no major or no new investment promised with the summit, which took place 3 weeks ago. So that is a kind of major sort of not I wouldn't say that it is a major development, but this is a notable development in terms of 70+1, because at the beginning of 70+1 framework, so many investments has been promised, and now in 2021, no major investment was promised. So we could still see the changing roles and evaluation concerning 17+1 is taking place. So what we really need to discuss is how Japan could fill the gap now that China is not promising a major investment anymore to the 17 countries. But this sort of discussion has not really been started yet in Japan, I think. And focus on Hungary has been quite evident in everything, in particular for the 17+1 agreement summit, but also to the KAI agreement as well. So Hungary, we still see, we rightly see Hungary as a key player in V4. So it is really vital for us to know how Hungary evaluates the 70+1 agreement, how Hungary evaluates KAI agreement as well. So I think this makes a great starting point for us to discuss the new development between Europe and Japan, and V4 and Japan. Thank you very much for your time. Peter, you are muted.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Higashino-sensei, for sharing your analysis with us about the geopolitical context of our topic today. Next, I will ask Dr. Agnes Sunomar to take the floor. Agnes is a senior research fellow at the Hungarian Institute of World Economics and also head of the research group on development economics. And she's also an associate professor of the Kaoru University of Budapest. Agnes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I hope that you can hear me and see me, at least see my slides here. So I am the third speaker, which means that it is inevitable that I'm going to overlap with the previous two speakers, but I try not to duplicate what they have just been said, but try to refer to what has been presented previously. So for instance, as you can see, the topic of my presentation is Japanese FDI for indirect investment in the Visegrad 4 region. And it, of course, refers quite close to what Professor Kaoru Natsuda was talking about. But I'm going to give you a little broader picture focusing on all types of investment and all the trends that has been going on in the past few decades. And when it comes to the presentation of Professor Atsuko Higashino, I think that I'm going to refer to her speech as well, since I will also make a comparison between Japanese presence and Chinese presence in the region, in Hungary in particular. So when it comes to this broader picture about Japanese companies targeting the V4 region, as I've promised, I think that we should differentiate between three waves in the 90s and in the 2000s. So as it has already been mentioned by our distinguished moderator, for instance, Japanese companies targeted the V4 region long before the democratic transition of these countries. So the first investments were made in the service sector in the late 70s and in the early 80s. Those were mainly general trading companies such as Itochu that opened local representative offices in various V4 countries. And after one another, there were some other companies from Japan with the purpose of mediating transactions and trade between V4 countries and Japan, and also acting as distributors representing certain goods in their line of products. The big breakthrough, though, was brought about by the transition from communism to the Western style democracy in the region. So it was in 1989 and more in the 1990s. The largest of these was the establishment of the already mentioned Magyar Suzuki company in 1991. But of course, Suzuki's experience, as it has been said by Professor Natsuda, became model for other Japanese companies that also decided to invest in the region and also in Hungary. So for instance, Sony began manufacturing in Gödöllő already in the 90s and was joined by some other companies such as Alpine, like Java, Clarion, and TDK of the electronic entertainment industry. And also there were some other companies such as the already mentioned Denso or Hughes of the car parts manufacturing industry. And these companies were also established in the second half of the 1990s. The third wave took place, of course, with the EU accession or the EU accession procedure of the Visegrad 4 countries. And these early years, 2004, 2005, brought 3 major investments to Hungary, for instance. This was Asahi Glass, Ibiden, and Bridgestone, all of which operate in the automobile industry. So, as you could observe in the previous presentations, as well as just a few seconds ago, electronics and automotive are the most targeted industries in the V4, but later on, so after the early 2000s, Japanese companies arrived in other sectors too, such as chemicals, like Zoltex, such as food, like Nissin, or even beverages. Most of the Hungarian audience probably knows that Asahi Group acquired Dreher, which is a famous Hungarian brewing company. As it has already been mentioned, there are quite some numbers of companies from Japan in the V4 region. I checked it in the Amadeus database, and according to that database, there are more than 700 companies, Japanese companies, affiliates operating in the Visegrad 4 region. When it comes to their geographical location, it is quite diverse. So some of these companies are located in the more developed regions of the V4 countries. In case of Hungary, for instance, it means the northwestern part of the country with a larger cluster around the capital city. But there are cases of Japanese companies located in less prosperous subregions, in the case of Hungary, such as Eastern Hungary, for instance. Here you can see the East Asian FDI stock in the V4, because I think that it worth to check it in a broader context, so not just focusing on the Japanese companies' investments in the V4 countries, but also South Korean as well as Chinese investments. We talk a lot about China these days. So we talk a lot about Chinese investments, and even Western European countries are talking a lot about this, with a huge fear of the Chinese stepping in and ruling over all the other players. But I would like to emphasize that this is quite far from the reality. So as you can see, Chinese investments are smaller in almost all of the cases, so compared to the Japanese or the South Korean investments. So as you can see, it is quite significant in Poland, in the Czech Republic, and in Hungary. And in all these cases, these are higher stock data than that of China. When it comes to South Korea, it depends on country. The Visegrad, it depends on country to country, which is higher, the Japanese or the South Korean ones, but still they outnumber Chinese investments. In the next graph, I decided to focus on Hungary, since Hungary hosts the majority of Chinese FDI in the Central and Eastern European region. So I thought that I make a comparison between them. I'm going to show you another graph soon with focusing only on the Asian players, but here this graph is to show you that the share of the East Asian investors, if we of course put them together, became quite significant recently. So we always thought that they are just representing together just a few % of the total FDI stock in Hungary. But if you just add the Japanese, the South Korean, the Indian, and the Chinese FDI together, you will see that it is already above 10%, which is a very nice result, if I can say so. But of course, the most important message of this graph is that it is still the European Union. So these are still the European countries that has a major share in the total FDI stock in Hungary, as well as in the other Visegrad countries, of course. So this is the second graph I promise you. It is again focusing on the Hungarian case with South Korea, Japan, India, and China. So again, we talk a lot about China here in Hungary. The media is absolutely flooded with cases of new Chinese investments or different kind of planned or negotiated infrastructure projects. Well, we shouldn't forget that even if the Chinese stock of FDI is increasing, but it is still small compared to what the Japanese companies, for instance, invested in the country, which means that we should talk a bit more about the other East Asian players as well. So not just about China, and maybe it has to be appreciated, it should be appreciated a bit more, since they are rooted, that have more historical roots in the Hungarian economy as well. And finally, which is also interesting for me, at least, since I'm doing some management type of research as well on East Asian companies' operations in Central and Eastern Europe, and visited quite a lot of East Asian factories in the region, including the already mentioned Magyar Suzuki, that the management methods at the V4 subsidiaries of Japanese companies represent a unique mix in terms of human resource management and other type of management methods, and that these are very interesting and worth to analyze a bit more deeper, which we are doing at the Institute of World Economics currently. So from this research, I would like to share with you just a few thoughts, since I think that this uniqueness is rooted mainly in four processes, or in four trends. The first is the early foundation of Japanese-Hungarian collaboration in Hungary's modern economic development. This is already mentioned by Péter, our moderator. So this history of relationship has started decades ago, which means that it has an effect on the way how the Japanese companies are operating in the V4 region. The second one is the US-Thai influence on European affiliates of Japanese multinationals. So this is not a purely Japanese method of management practices we can observe here, but the US-Thai influence is also there as well. The third one is the EU accession, or the European Union's effect on the Hungarian market practices, which is also quite strongly affecting these trends. And finally, CE markets are also unique compared to other European markets. So I would say that a Japanese affiliate in the V4 and the Japanese affiliate in Austria, which is not far from here, would come up with huge differences, since V4 countries, CE countries in general, experience a drastic transition from communism to Western style democracy, which also had or which also made some effect on these management methods. And of course, where we are talking about a mix of management methods, the mix of all these facts and trends I have just mentioned, together with the Japanese and the Hungarian practices and methods. So I think that this is a really interesting and unique mix, which of course can be compared to the South Korean as well as to the Chinese case. But I would say that when I'm examining the Chinese relations or the Chinese management methods, I always start from the Japanese example. This happens when I'm teaching my students for East Asian development models, for instance. We are always starting using the Japanese examples, since it has quite a lot of impact on how the other East Asian countries and East Asian companies started their operations, which means that it is absolutely worth to study those early years as well. And I stop here so as we can spare some time and have the opportunity to answer the questions later on.
Thank you very much, Agnes. Thank you. It was very interesting for me to see those graphs with the FDI stock value, because we like to use the historical figures, simply just adding up the value of investments, and if we use those figures for the Japanese FDI, then of course we will get much higher figures. So it was very interesting for me to see the present value of those investments. And now I'd like to turn to Ambassador Zoltán Sűdy, who was former ambassador of Hungary to Japan, but also to Thailand. And he's the founder and chairman of Shudi & Co., which is a Hungary-based consulting company specialized in business creation and support between Japan and Central Eastern European companies. Zoltán, please, the floor is yours. And you are muted.
Sorry for the technical lack of technical skills. Let me start in a very short form. I will also start from Hungary and from the trade angle. As you can see from the chart, which contains Hungarian forint-based data, that we have a substantial trade turnover with Japan. Japan is ranking as the 23rd country among the foreign trade partners of Hungary. And its shares in Hungary's exports is 0.6%, in the share of imports is 1.4%. And we have a fairly significant negative balance of trade, which I always try to explain to everybody involved that it doesn't matter really, because much of the imports is eventually re-exported in the form of complete products, because we import some important parts from Japan, and we also import lots of important equipment for the manufacturing of export goods. The main export items are road vehicles, medicine, and meat, and the main import items are again, road vehicles, energy generating equipment, and electric machines and instruments. We have seen more recent data from Agnes, so I just skip this slide. I just also want to mention that though the difference between the Japanese investments in Hungary and the Hungarian investments in Japan is huge. But we should also be aware that there are some minor Hungarian investments already in Japan, mostly by sales, mostly sales operations by Hungarian companies, and primarily they are coming from the IT sector. The first such operation was established by Graphisoft in 1995, but by now there are about a dozen Hungarian companies who have a small-scale presence in Japan. Now, let us have a look at the region from the Japanese angle. I also wanted to stress that we always have to consider, when we look at the Japanese viewpoint, we always have to consider the regional angle, because our countries, one by one, are too small to have any meaningful presence in the minds of the Japanese. It's the potential is only for our region as such. And as you can see in long-term trends, the import from the CE countries has a fairly nicely growing trend over the years. The decrease that you see in the 2018 is mainly owing to the swine cholera and the avian flu, because both Poland and Hungary are rather large meat exporters in standard normal years, but these exports have been affected. And this is the share of, I mean, this is on the left-hand side, you see this share percentage-wise of the region in the Japan's foreign trade in the exports. But I think the main issue is the trend. The yellow line shows the trend. The blue columns show the worldwide exports of Japan. And this is this chart shows the trends in the Japanese exports to the Central Eastern European region. Is not only V4, it also includes Romania and Bulgaria. As you can see, Poland is by far the largest market, but Hungary and Czech Republic also have a significant share. And similar is the picture in case of imports from our region, but here Poland doesn't have a particular lead. Rather, it's a bit lagging behind Hungary and the Czech Republic. And it is interesting also to note, so that not belongs to the V4, the quick growth of the exports from Romania. Because of the limited time, I decided just to concentrate some of the interesting perspectives. I would like to point out that we expect that, and we also already experienced that some of the Japanese companies that have manufacturing companies in the UK started to transfer at least part of their activities to Central Eastern Europe. So this way we may get some benefit from the Brexit also. Actually, everybody is aware of the negative impacts. I think that both regarding the trade turnover between the region and also the Japanese investment, the economic partnership agreement concluded between the EU, in other words, the free trade framework, is encouraging, and we already see signs of growth in those product categories that have the earliest effects. I mean, where the customs duties immediately were eliminated completely. But even in those categories where there is only a gradual decrease, we see increased interest from Japanese importers. We also see signs that some of the major European buyers, primarily, it means the automotive industry, the automotive European OEMs, as a lesson from the COVID pandemics, decided to try to shorten their supply chain and encourage companies either to move production in the neighborhood, that means to Europe, for example, from China, or they are looking to alternative suppliers from our regions. Now, I think that the Trump era had an effect. Even I believe that the speeding up of the process of the conclusion of the EPA it owes quite much to the trade and economic policies of the Trump regime in the United States, and it also encouraged the interest of Japan and that of China also to look for a closer cooperation with the EU region. Now, since most of the Japanese investments in our region are related to automotive industry, I expect that there will be rather large changes, structural changes related to the very and unexpectedly quick increase of e-mobility in Europe. And it will be interesting to see how Japanese major tier 1 suppliers will be able to cope with the new types of demand. For the time being, we see that Koreans are trying to gain a very strong foothold in the lithium-ion battery market, and they have chosen Hungary as their primary base for this battery production in Europe, while from the Japanese side, we have only limited efforts. GS USA has a small plant in Miskolc for the time being, and Toray is building a large plant to supply the Korean battery manufacturers. But certainly there is an opportunity there, and I hope that the Japanese companies will make good use of it. And I think that we also have to try to utilize the new opportunities related to EPA to increase the exports from our region, and being involved in the practical business development between these countries and Japan, I can point out primarily the IT and the food industry as currently having the best opportunities to increase their business in Japan. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Shudi. It is quite remarkable. I just realized now that this 1% share, or around 1% share of Japanese trade volume in the overall Hungarian trade figures is something that it looks like it is a constant figure from the 80s, during the 90s, in the 2000s. So it seems that for 4 decades, this is a share which is constantly remaining in the bilateral trade relations. This is quite remarkable. And now, if you allow me, let's turn to the questions. We already received the first one in the chat quite early, and I think this is for primarily for Professor Natsuda. And it sounds: the geographical distance and the high transport costs are facts. What could Japan improve in the field of services related to the automotive industry, especially Hungarian Suzuki?
This question is very actually difficult question. Then what I can say is firstly, like a geographical distance issue is there like a strategy was restructure their production network also, like this kind of product was no choice, basically. Hungary should produce a bit more added value products. That's like a transportation cost. It's not like a European market small car, basically. So that's like a Major Suzuki carefully calculated the cost and production issues, basically. Then decided to produce those like a sports utility vehicle in Hungary. So that's like a fact, actually. Then, and how like a Major Suzuki or automotive industry improve this is like a field of services, or you mean like a production, maybe technology transfer and so on, I guess, is one of the biggest issue in the automotive industry between Europe and Japan is industrial and standard differences. So, and one like, if like we could unify under EPA, for example, industrial standard is different in each country, basically, or Europe is one standard, Japan, US, or Asian country. So that's like automotive industry require safety strongly. So this kind of a standard, the Japanese company, especially developing car in Japan, Suzuki case, they cannot use European standard, or it's not convertible well. It takes minimum 6 months to 24 months to verify materials they use from local, like a steel, local aluminum, whatever. So it's one of like a possible like improvement. Once like they improve or this kind of unify industrial standard will be much easier for Japanese companies source locally, basically, or with much easier, I would say. Then another issue is what Japan can do is Japanese company, not Major Suzuki, but lots of Japanese company, they are conducting R&D in Germany. It's not in Hungary. Only one company, I think Sumitomo Cables. Then 3 firms in Czech Republic, Czechia. So most of R&D are still conducted in Germany. So this kind of like a relocation of R&D activities is one of the key issues for V4 countries probably. It's increasing slowly in Czech Republic, or 3, but before was 1. So that's quite important. Then in terms of R&D also, like a network with universities is quite important. University industry network, how like create this kind of network, enhance like a local, like a technological capability. So that's like I can address the issue in Hungary, I think. Is it okay? Anna, I think Anna asked me, so.
Yes. Okay, I have another question. When we talk about the geopolitical context or the political issues related to investment, Higashino-sensei, can you tell us how the Hungarian or Polish issues with Brussels are viewed from Japan when it comes to political concerns, or is it a factor for Japanese companies regarding political stability?
Thank you very much, Mr. Wintermantel. This is the again, the question of rule of law and democracy in terms of the Hungary and Poland is again widely covered in Japanese newspapers and TVs as well. And however, very interestingly or strangely or whatever, I think a business circle is really cutting the question as beside or the between the political question and the economic question, and before it's very still considered a very stable target for Japanese company or Japanese businesses to make an investment, I think. So even though in a general level, we've got a concern concerning the this PIS issue and FIDES issue, this is largely considered as the other way. And I think this is the very general response from the side of Japan when it's considered the economic relationship and political relationship. Again, in terms of Japan-China relationship, this applies the same. Same thing applies because Japan, even though Japan is really critical to Chinese political system, again, Japanese companies are very willing to have a very good relationship economically with Japan and China. So yes, we do. Yes, we do have some concern that the Budapest and Warsaw has got have something at odds with the policy in Brussels, and we are often the things that they the sanction, for example, from the viewpoint of Lisbon Treaty Article number 7 can be applied to the Hungary and Poland. It's really covered in Japanese newspaper as well, but I think the whole argument is really discussed in a separate ground. So I hope this answers your question.
Yes, definitely. Thank you very much. There was a very informative list in your last slide, Zoltán, where you listed many important questions, and I think that we have the opportunity to discuss some of them here with all the panelists. And first, what I would like to ask was the Brexit issue. Is it an opportunity for Hungary to attract some of the jobs? So how do you evaluate, and this is for all of you, what does Brexit could mean with regard to Japanese investments in the Visegrad countries?
Well, actually, as I guess most of you know, the very large share of the Japanese investments in Europe have concentrated in the UK. So I didn't make any comparisons recently, but my just gut feeling is that probably the total Japanese investments in the UK exceed the total of the rest of Europe. So this also means that the Japanese companies used to use the UK as their operational base for the European market, not only for the UK market. And with the introduction of simply just the customs clearance, there are no customs duties, but there is a customs clearance. And I very well remember that when Sony started to manufacture products in Hungary in around '96, then the CEO of Sony Hungary complained to me that they have to employ close to 30 people in order to process the papers for the customs-free clearance of the exports from the Sony factory in Hungary to the EU markets. And now basically the setup is similar for the UK. They have a free trade. I mean, they don't have, they don't have to pay any customs duties, but they have to do customs clearance. And they also have to show that there is the required domestic content of their exports from the UK to Europe. So this makes several Japanese. There were already some companies which moved to Central Eastern Europe. Naturally, we also know, and this is a very good feature of the Japanese companies, that unlike many other companies from many other countries, they don't move quickly. So even if the conditions worsen, they try to find some ways to maintain their competitiveness and keep their base and not to close the factories. So we see this again now related to Brexit, and probably it will not be, there will not be a large wave of Japanese companies closing down their factories and moving to Central Eastern Europe. But certainly I expect that there will be cases for such a move. By the way, I also expect that there will be a very slow movement also for Japanese manufacturing companies from the western part of Europe to the eastern part of Europe because of the increasing manufacturing costs and problems with their competitiveness related to the manufacturing costs.
Thank you.
Can I add some comment information? Yeah, it's a Japanese FDI in Europe. It's like Western European side, UK, Holland. Recent trend is M&A is increasing quite rapidly. That's a part of beer company in Hungary. I think they took over Belgian company. Then this Belgian company had a Hungarian or Czech Pilsner. So that type of M&A is very increasing quite rapidly in Western side. But still like a Japanese company are looking at the Central European V4 country as a more like a production base, basically, FDI. But one of the issue in this like V4 region, labor cost is increasing rapidly now. It used to be quite productive and the labor costs are cheap, but not anymore. So it's quite difficult to secure labor at the moment. So Japanese like a previous labor intensive company factories are shifting, for example, from Czechia to Romania, like a cable companies and so on. Yazaki, for example. So that's like a regional like relocation is occurring. So it's still like lots of Japanese company are viewing this like a V4 region is a production base. Still like a small number of company are floating, especially automotive related. And most recently, I think electric vehicle related investment are increasing actually. And the material like aside, including Hungary, US battery couple of years, I think, years ago. They started operating this year or last year, I forgot. And also related, or like a chemical companies, actually they are producing for electric vehicle materials, basically. So this type of investments are occurring, I would say, in Central Asian. Sorry, Central European. I work sometimes Central Asia, sorry, Central European region. So.
Okay, thank you very much.
If I can add just something, if it's possible. So let me just share with you my screen again. So as you can see that what has been said by Zoltán is absolutely the case. So if you can see my screen right now, but maybe I can make it full screen. So you will be able to see that the vast majority of Japanese FDI is located or hosted by the United Kingdom. Absolutely. So Germany is the second one, but far away from what has been invested in the UK so far. And with the Brexit and with those administrative issues, it may result in some companies leaving the UK for the European Union. And here, probably the Visegrad region has to work on a strategy on how to invite those Japanese companies making a decision on leaving the UK. Probably this can be a potential, I don't know, opportunity for the V4 countries, especially if they will be able to act together, which is usually not the case. But I think that there's a gap here we can fill in at least, or try to fill in. And I absolutely agree with what has been said by Professor Natsuda, that the Japanese companies are more eager to leave their bases now than they were 10, 20 or 30 years ago. So if the conditions are not as perfect as they imagined, they are absolutely eager to leave, and there has been some examples for that already. And there has been some complaints from those companies operating in the V4 region, Japanese companies, because of the rising wages, because of the lack of proper labor force. So I think that there are some new trends on the way.
Thank you very much. I like what you said, Agnes, about the opportunity for the Visegrad countries to perhaps to move together, because I always have the feeling that we tend to think of ourselves as competitors, and yes, in many investment cases, of course, we are, but I think that there is room for joint programs, or of course it is obvious as a joint touristic promotion, and there are joint research programs funded by the International Visegrad Fund with the Japanese participants, but certainly there could be more to be done on joint economic promotion as well. I'd like to urge our audience to keep sending their questions both in the chat of the Zoom call, but also they can send questions in the comment of the Facebook Live event. We received a question to Ambassador Shudi. Can Hungarian companies in agriculture, food industry benefit from the tariff reduction under the EU-Japan EPA? Are they aware of the EPA? Do they use it? Do you have any experiences in this field?
Thank you. I think I even hinted at this during my presentation, that the decrease of the customs duties is already showing its effects on the Hungarian exports to the Japanese market. For example, we don't have any customs duties for wine, for example, and it's not a significant increase, but there is a noticeable increase already, for example, in the exports of wines, and even in such product categories like say duck meat or broiler meat, where the reduction is gradual, and it is only around 1% or so per year, and so we are just in the entering the third year. So the effect is not so huge. I mean, the decrease in customs duty is not so huge, but nevertheless, it already shows in the increase, and also in the increase of interest of importers for potential future business that we also feel. So yes, there is a positive trend. And if I have the word, let me just comment on Professor Natsuda's recent remark. The lack of major M&A projects in our region is partly owing to the fact that in our region, most of the major companies, and it is especially true for Hungary, are multinational companies and not locally owned companies. So what we are active nowadays is we are trying to draw the attention of the Japanese SMEs that are very strong, healthy Japanese SMEs with very high-level technologies, for whom the entry to the Japanese market could be via acquisition or a joint venture with local SMEs in these markets. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We also received a question What is your view on the position of Japan in the China-US trade war? Who wants to answer that? Perhaps Higashino-sensei can.
Thank you, Anna Mikhanakil, for excellent question. And yes, the China-US trade war is considered to be a very serious problem in Japan as well. But I think many Japanese people, again this time political, diplomatic circle or economic circle, they equally think that it is not an urgent question for us Japanese, but it is largely considered as it is the question or dilemma faced by European people. So we kind of, postponing kind of strategic sort of choice between US and the confrontation between US and China. When we speak from the viewpoint of the security or defense policy, it goes without saying that we have no choice. Our choice is the US. Not China, but trade war has got even more elements, as you can imagine. And when we think about this geopolitical, geoeconomical elements in consideration, I think it is for us Japanese, it is a very, very difficult decision to make. And so at this moment, I have to really say sarcastically that Japan is really postponing all the sort of essential decision that we really have to make. And we are watching Europe that facing a dilemma, for example, considering the, just as I said in my presentation about the, concerning the use of Huawei of 5G network. So one by one, countries are making decisions like Poland and Romania, they are Baltic countries. They decided to ban Huawei from their 5G network, while other countries are still making a choice, including Hungary. So we're really watching this closely, but we don't really see that it is the urgent question for us, but it is the urgent question for European countries. So I think this sort of psychological distance can explain how Japan is really observing the whole situation between the US and China. And if I may add another thing, it is for us, it's getting to be a more problematic when we have Biden administration after Trump administration, because in terms of Trump administration, the President Trump was indeed problematic, but his stance was that he's going his way, and US is going on the way, and the US didn't expect Japan to follow exactly the way that the US was following. But when it's come to the Biden administration, they do expect us to do the same. So, President Biden is often saying that the multilateral cooperation in dealing with the international problem is really essential. So it means that every time they go through the very difficult questions concerning US-China confrontation, they make us to make a very difficult decision as well. So I think this is the huge difference between the Trump administration and Biden administration. And in terms of the Biden administration, they may ask Japan to really follow the way that the US is making. So I think the problem is getting harsher and harsher, more difficult and difficult at the time of Biden administration when it comes to the US-China trade war. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Peter, may I make just a short comment? Sorry, I just want to come back, since we have been talking about China now, to Professor Higashino's presentation and her comment how Japan could balance the Chinese role. And I would like to point out that at least as far as Hungary is concerned, and as far as I know, there have been a continuous interest from the Hungarian side to involve Japanese companies and Japanese side, so to say, in, for example, major infrastructural projects. And since we are talking about V4, let me just mention that one huge project is being prepared now. Feasibility studies or preparatory studies are being done. There is a budget for this project. Now it's the V4 high-speed railway line connecting Budapest and Warsaw. I believe, just as an example, but I have a fairly nice list of similar large-scale infrastructural projects where we could we would welcome Japanese involvement. But what I feel that there is which is the problem currently, that the major Japanese corporations, trading companies or major manufacturing companies, one by one, they prefer to concentrate on closer and more familiar markets. And there is very limited will, what you use in Japanese, this phrase, to raise the flag. Because these major projects necessarily require the involvement of several major companies, but somebody has to take the initiative. And there is no initiative taker. And unfortunately, for the time being, the Japanese government didn't also make any moves to take the initiative. But there is a room. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We received a comment, which is not a question. I think
Yes.
this relates to
another bit of comments on China-US issues.
Yes.
Actually, it's not like related to European countries, but what is happening is Japanese government actually is start subsidizing, providing incentives to companies, providing like subsidies basically to the company which withdraw from China. Actually, government, yeah, that is happening, and the US too. Then Japanese company, what they are looking is coming back to Japan or investing in particularly Southeast Asia is an important market for us. So balancing now. So that's like a situation. But I don't know how those companies might be interested in V4 country or not. But, and that's like it's happening at the moment. So Japanese, another important issue this week, especially or last week, since is a Uyghur issue, human rights issue in China. Then Japanese big company will be strongly criticized. So they are seriously considering this China's human rights issue, actually. That will happen in the future, probably. That's how I'm viewing at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I think we have to conclude here. Our time is approaching to the end. There is just one last comment I wanted to share with the audience. I think this relates to Agnes's presentation. It says that we are a general supplier company, and it was helpful to see the definition of US style management, since we have experienced this and it explains the practice. Thank you for the information. We also thank you. And then my only remaining duty is to announce that the next program in this series will be in mid-March, and which will discuss Japanese, Chinese, and Korean presence in the region. I'd like to say thank you to our participants, to our experts joining us from Japan and also from Budapest, and also our audience to following this online event. Thank you very much.